Let's open our Bibles this morning, if you would. And we are studying the Ten Commandments. Where are those plates? Those plates aren't down here. All right. And let me get to where I need to be. All right. All right, good. Here we go. So we're studying the Ten Commandments, folks. I was trying to think what Sunday school kind of lessons that'll bring people in from everywhere. Everybody will want to hear about if they just hear the title of it. And then I thought, what's the one thing that's guaranteed to keep people away? And I thought, Ten Commandments. And so that's the one that we decided on. Oops, sorry. Okay, so we've decided on, we're going to, we're going to the Sixth Commandment, all right? So thou shalt not kill, all right? Now, we talked about some of the things the commandment does not prohibit. The Sixth Commandment does not prohibit the death penalty or capital punishment. The Bible makes that clear. We won't go back into that. The Sixth Commandment does not prohibit self-defense. The Bible makes that clear. The Sixth Commandment does not prohibit war, all right? Speaking of war, I don't know about y'all, but I didn't know there was so much Jewish hatred in the world. I did not know that. Now, anytime there's a war going over in the Middle East, it's always worrisome and troublesome, right, for us who are Christians. But I'm not that old, but I don't remember there being this much anti-Semitism. I mean, on our college campuses with the young people and all over the country and all over Europe. But of course, there's going to be anti-Semitism because why should the world have any regard for God's chosen people at all? I mean, so it's to be expected. But I was surprised at the amount of anti-Semitism. I mean, one more generation, and I was... Maybe even when I'm still alive, we'll probably when I'm still alive have our very first president who comes to office saying, I'm not going to back Israel. We've never had that before. We may have that in the future, right? I'm just glad whoever is propping up Joe that they told him to support Israel because he's pretty much, not all the way, but he's pretty much supported them so far, and I'm at least grateful for that. As long as they can keep him awake long enough to support Israel. I'm sorry, I'll stop making jokes. That's not right. What the Sixth Commandment does prohibit. So that's what it does not prohibit. The Sixth Commandment does not prohibit any of those things. That's what the Bible says. And we went into detail, and you can go into detail on your own. Sixth Commandment does prohibit violence. It prohibits homicide. We talked about that. And suicide. Suicide is becoming an epidemic in our culture. It's the 9th leading cause of death in the United States. Approximately one death every 17 minutes. There are more suicides than homicides every year in the United States. It's the 3rd leading cause of death for teenagers. Now, the Bible teaches, and the church has believed for centuries, that suicide is a sin. And I've read from some of the old timers in the 1800s and 1700s and 1600s. They had a phrase they used to call suicide. They called it self-murder. And then the word murdered. I don't know, pass them, will you take those discs from him and then pass them somewhere, sister? Okay, I don't know where they go, though. I have no idea. Okay, good. All right, they go that way? All right, good. Christmas CDs, everybody, Christmas CDs. All right, there we go. If I would have charged for them, everybody would have wanted one. But it was often referred to as self-murder. So it's the same thing as a violation of the Seventh Commandment because you're murdering, except you're murdering yourself, right? And it's always been taught that if you're guilty of committing sin, then you're making a moral choice and you are to pay for your moral choice, right? Suicide is not only an offense of our dignity because the Bible says we are created in the image of God, but it also attempts to rob or overrule the purpose that God has for our lives. You don't know, or no one knows what purpose God may have for their life, right? And so when you take your own life, then you're saying to yourself, I don't care that I'm made in God's image. I'm willing to defile and deface God's image by destroying it. And also, I'm willing to take the place of God because I don't care what God has planned for me. What I have planned is more important. Kind of what you're saying. Turn to 1 Samuel chapter 2. 1 Samuel chapter 2, if you would. 1 Samuel chapter 2. And let's look at verse number. No. I'm in 2 Samuel. I'm like, that verse doesn't look right. Indeed, it wasn't. Let's see if this one looks any better. Let's look at 1 Samuel 2:6. How about that? Verse number 6. The Lord killeth and maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave and bringeth up. The idea here is that God's in control. God is in control, right? In suicide, what we're saying is we're in control of our own fate and our own destiny, not God. It's the ultimate expression of rebellion against God. We see a lot of rebellion against God all day, every day. And the latest fad of rebellion against God is choosing your own gender, right? That's also rebellion against God, choosing your own gender. If you were born with boy parts and you want to claim as a girl, you're saying to God that I don't care how you made me, it doesn't matter, I'm in charge of myself. I don't even care about biology. I will say what I am to be and what I'm to do and what I'm to be called. Suicide is also, I think, an expression of rebellion against God. God hasn't given us the right to kill ourselves or claim lordship over our own lives. And especially we know this as Christians, we have an obligation to say this to people, right? There were many years ago, I was a young kid and I was teaching, and I did have a girl that was going through some, as girls do and boys do too as teenagers, going through some stuff, and she asked me she knew I was a Christian, she asked me point blank, is suicide a sin? And honestly, at the time, I didn't know for sure. I thought it was, but I didn't want to say if I wasn't sure, so I told her I'm not sure. But I wish I would have known, and then that's, of course, when I went back and started studying about, But obviously today, knowing what I know now about the sixth commandment, I would say, of course, suicide is a sin. So God hasn't given us the right to take our own lives or claim lordship over our own lives. And we need to tell people that. We need to say to people that suicide is a sin. Well, you don't want to make them feel worse about themselves. Well, if they kill themselves, that's, then they're gone. And then they have nothing left but the judgment. So I don't think it's being unkind or uncharitable for us to say that. It might sometimes jolt someone into contemplating a different way of thinking by just telling them suicide is a sin and all sinners go to hell. Now, those two statements are not incorrect. They are both correct. Suicide is a sin, correct, and all sinners go to hell without, of course, the shed blood of Jesus Christ. Kevin DeYoung wrote on this subject, and he said this: God will never lead us into a situation where violating this commandment is our only option. Did you hear that? God will never lead us into a situation where violating his commandment is our only option. We do not help people by refusing to tell them that suicide is displeasing to God. Your life is precious to God, even when you have concluded that it is pointless. So you may think your life is pointless, but to God, your life is not pointless, and no one's life is pointless, right? And so we as Christians believe better, more, those are not good adjectives, but we believe more better things, how about just combining them both, about life than the atheist does, because if you're an atheist, you're here and then you're gone and that's it. And while you're here, you're just a warm meat machine. That's what they call us. We're meat machines, or we're meat computers, or whatever. We're a computer with meat. That's all we are. If that's true, then you really have no reason to live. And there's no reason for me not to take your life. So, of course, being a Christian, we have a high value of life, much higher than anybody else. So suicide is not the answer. True relief can only be found in Christ. True relief for any of your problems and your troubles can only be found in Christ. Only Christ can understand your pain. Only Christ can understand your sorrows and the sorrows that we go through. And conversely, only Christ can fulfill your deepest desires. Glenn Ganassi wrote a book a year or two ago called Our Deepest Desires. And he lists 5 things: truth, beauty, companionship, 2 other things I can't remember, as things that humans just can't seem to live without. And whether you're a Christian or an atheist, we all seem to need companionship. We all need to seek out truth. We all seem to seek out beauty. There's things that we just can't live without. And his whole premise of his book was those things are better fulfilled through God than anything else this world has to offer, right? And so let's go on to the next one. The next thing, the Sixth Commandment does not prohibit abortion. Does the Sixth Commandment prohibit abortion? I'm sorry, does prohibit. I said does not. Sorry about that. That didn't sound right even as I was saying it and I wasn't thinking about it. Just in the back of my mind. Did that sound right? Okay, we're on things the Sixth Commandment does prohibit. All right, so Brother Chris says he supports abortion. That's going to go out and now everybody will believe that. All right, sorry. We are looking at things the Sixth Commandment does prohibit. And abortion's one of the things the Sixth Commandment prohibits. Before the overturning of Roe v. Wade, thank the Lord, abortions were taking place at over 23,000 a week. Now, Christians have always believed, and the church has always taught, that an unborn child is a person made in the likeness and image of God, because that's what the Bible teaches. Turn to Psalm 139. I was just in this psalm the other day, and I can't remember why, but not for this reason. I was in this psalm for another reason. Let me look at my psalms. Mine are in poetical setting. Are y'all's? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's right. I remember that was probably, I should remember better. Because we men are bad at remembering. That's why that our wives remember everything, right? Is that it? Is that their reason for having memories like elephants? I thought about this just yesterday. I was thinking about this. You know, my wife, like most women, remembers every little thing I've said wrong that I shouldn't have said, everything I shouldn't have done that I did, everything I said to her that I just shouldn't have said. It was in anger, and I apologize later, but they never forget it. It stays up here. It never goes away. But that's not really fair, because I was also thinking this. They remember every little thing we may have said in a moment of anger or whatever, everything we probably shouldn't have said and we did, and we probably apologized for it. They remember all those things, but the good things we do, all the flowers, that stays for about a day or two, about a week or two, and then that's gone, right? All the door openings and all the flowers, and with my wife, I sometimes would go to the gate and open the gate for her at night. She gets scared, and our gate is a half a mile away from our house, and so it's just by itself there. And so sometimes I'd meet her at the gate at night, and she would be very, very thankful. Thank you so much. That is so sweet of you. But then next week when I do something wrong, where did all that love go? I've stored up all these good works, and when I need them, they're just thrown out the window. They're forgotten. So they remember all of our bad, and they barely remember any of our good past a day or two. So I was thinking to myself, why am I opening all these gates at night? I'll walk a half a mile up to the gate, or when I'm lazy, I'll drive. But I'll walk a half a mile up to the gate to open the gate for her when I think she's almost here and going to be here. And then I'm getting yelled at now for whatever, you know. I'm like, can I buy a little bit of goodwill? Anyway, that's beside the point. That's beside the point. I didn't ask from comments from the audience. Psalm 139, it's such an amazing psalm. Would you mind if we read a bunch of it? It's an amazing song. It really is. Psalm, it really is. Lord, Psalm 139, verse 1, Lord, thou hast searched me and know me. Thou knowest my down sitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compasseth my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. How about that? Thou hast beset me behind and before, and and laid thine hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain to it. Man, there's a lot of times when I'm reading my Bible, I'm thinking that verse right there. Lord, I can't. I was in John 17 for most of the week. I'm like, Lord, I can't even scratch the surface of what you've got here. It's so incredibly deep. If I go read John 1 or Romans 1 or Ephesians 1, or I'm just like, such knowledge, I can't attain to it, right? Verse 7, whether shall I go from thy spirit, or whether shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up to heaven, into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. Now, I don't know anything, and I would never try to prove a doctrine just through one verse. And I'm not saying this is any kind of a proof verse, but some people say that God is not in hell, God could never be in hell. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not, because I can't think of one place in the whole universe that you could keep God out of that he's not a part of anyway, right? And I'm not using this verse to prove that. That's just what I've been thinking lately, because I've heard, you grow up and hear things, but then you start thinking and reading. And so I don't know if God's in hell or not. But here the Bible does say, but I think it's not a proof text, because David's not trying to make a point God's in hell. He's making a point that God's everywhere. There's nowhere I can go to escape God's face or God's mind, right? I know as sinners, and I say this as sinners because I'm a sinner saved by grace, but as sinners, sometimes we think that if we do things in private, no one will know. But God knows, and nothing's in private. All things are naked and open to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Verse 9, if I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness, now this is written to believers, and this is written as a comfort to us, that God is everywhere, no matter where we are. If you're a lost person today, I don't see how that's a comfort. But if you're a Christian, that's a comfort. Because look what he says in verse 11. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee. I just love the poetry of that. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee. To us, there's darkness and then there's light. But to God, they're all the same. God is everywhere, and it doesn't matter. Verse number 13, for thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I wanted to get to there. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right, well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect. And in thy book all my members were written, which in countenance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God, how great is the sum of them. I can't imagine that. Can you imagine that? That God, the creator of heaven and the sustainer of the heavens and the universe, thinks about me? And his thoughts about me are so great, and the sum of them is so great? I can't imagine that. Because if I had to sit around all day and think about myself, I would go crazy. And I would be depressed at the end of that day. Because if I think about myself and my thoughts and my life and my actions, it's going to lead me to depression without God, right? So I understand what I think he's trying to say here. Where was I? Verse 18, if I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee. Surely thou shalt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men, for they speak against thee wickedly, and thine enemies take thy name in vain. Do I not hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? Hatred is okay, as long as you hate those that God hates. And am not I grieved with those that rise up against thee? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them mine enemies. Search me, O God, we all know these verses, and know my heart, and try me, and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Just a great psalm. Do you not agree? Just a great psalm. I want to look at verses 13. For thou hast possessed my reins, and thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. In 13, David, speaking of life within the mother, possessed my reins literally means formed my inward parts. Covered me in my mother's womb just simply means you weaved, I had to look this up, or knitted together myself in my mother's womb. And I just got some illumination on something, just came to life. I don't know what it was. All of a sudden I can see clearly, whereas before things were cloudy. I think I had been slain in the phosphorescence, right? Anyway, the cathode ray is, okay. All right, anyway. A child in the womb is a living human being who has a relationship with God. So, because these verses say God formed us in the womb. We have a relationship with God when we are still within our mothers. To kill such a child is a violation of God's law. Now, the scientific view is life begins at conception, and that's a scientific fact. There's a little bit of an argument about what determines conception, right? But there's no argument that life begins at conception. Now, abortion promoters have no choice but to acknowledge this because it's a scientific fact, although now abortion choosers have started to deny science. Used to be it was like science is on our side. Now that science is advanced and technology is advanced and we can know a little bit about more what happens in the womb and when life really occurs, now science doesn't support them, so now they're not talking about science so much. They're talking about personhood and human rights, right? Anytime, so it's all about human rights, the right of the mother. Life begins at conception. That's a scientific fact. Pro-abortion people have no choice but to acknowledge this. So now they claim that personhood begins sometime after conception. Does it begin 5 weeks after conception, 10 weeks, 20 weeks? How many weeks? Does it begin at the moment of conception, 5 weeks after conception? There is no consensus on this among abortion supporters. But that's what they claim now. Okay, life may begin at conception, but we don't know when conception is. Oh, well, the scientific books all said conception is when the egg and the sperm and the egg fertilize, right? That's conception. But now they don't know when conception is, right? And even some people argue that a baby doesn't achieve a personhood on its own until it can actually exist outside of its mother's care. Well, half the 18-year-olds would be killed in this country because their parents are letting them sit inside their room still without a job and not going to college. I was always told that either I had a job or went to college, otherwise I wouldn't have a room in that house. And I was perfectly fine with that because as most teenage boys, I was ready to get out as soon as I could anyway, right? So there are even people that argue personhood doesn't exist until you can exist outside the womb or exist without your parents' help, right? So there's no agreement among abortion supporters about when personhood. They just say, well, personhood is whenever we think it is, but it's not, when the egg and the sperm fertilize, right? Both abortion and killing infants were common in the Greek and Roman Empire. When you ditch God, what are you going to get? Well, one thing we're seeing that's going to happen when you ditch God in the West is you're going to get anti-Semitism. We've seen a bunch of that. In our most enlightened and our most liberal city, you see rampant that's New York City, by the way, rampant anti-Semitism and pro-Palestinian support all over. Now, you may say to me, pro-Palestinian doesn't mean you're anti-Semite. Most of the time it does. Most of the time, if you're pro-Hamas, you're definitely anti-Semite. And if you're pro-Palestinian, you're probably pro-Hamas because the Palestinian people voted for Hamas in the first place. So, so our enlightened cities now all over, our enlightened school children that are going to be, cross your fingers and pray, are going to be running the country someday when you and I may be still alive. Those are the people that are coming out, and those are the people that are basically anti-Semites, right? But in the Greek and Roman Empire, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, but also in the Greek and Roman Empire, there was no God, and one of the things they had in the Greek and Roman Empire is they had the killing of babies. It was called infanticide, where you kill infants, right? And remember the babies they would kill? Who remembers when we went over this and we studied the history of the church? They would kill any baby that's sickly, any baby that's weak. And remember, the Romans, they worshiped strength, right? And a lot of times girl babies were killed because a girl's not going to bring you strength. Women were seen as weak, one step above slaves. Oh, you want to go back to the Greek and Roman days with no God? Congratulations, feminists. You're now going to be second-class citizens again. Hope you enjoy that. Christianity has brought up, anywhere it's been introduced and been part of the social fabric, Christianity has brought up women, has argued against slavery. But anyway, if you want to go back to the Greek and Roman times, that's what happened when you reject God. So we're going to go back to what we had before, and that's going to include abortion. But anyway, I say it's a moral matter. The beginning of life is not a scientific matter. I believe it's a moral matter. You know why I believe that? Because first of all, the people that support abortion were saying science, 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 and now they're not even mentioning anything about science. I know it didn't have anything to do about evidence. I know it didn't have anything to do with about science. Oh, when the pro-abortion people said, oh, the science, you got to follow the science. Take the mask and wear the mask and it's all about the science. They don't believe it's about the science for one split second. Because when the science said, conception begins when they fertilize, then they're like, what science? Well, we don't agree when conception, and they want to change the words. I don't believe any of those things. If you don't believe in God today, I don't believe that you have an evidential issue, that you don't have enough evidence, or you just haven't seen enough to convince you. That's a lie. You don't want to acknowledge God, and you don't want to believe in God because you don't want anything to rule over you, anybody to have any dominance over you. You want to be your own God. You want to do what you want. So I don't believe anything today that there's a problem with evidence or science. Science is not the issue. I don't believe science was ever the issue on the COVID stuff. I believe some scientists really meant well and weren't really sure. Not a problem with that. But I believe for a lot of people, politicians especially, it wasn't about the science. It was about control. That's what it usually is. It's usually about control. Can I finish this? Here we go. So if some of y'all stop interrupting me, I'll finish. So anyway, Alistair Begg wrote this. Our godless friends are determined to prove, if not in the laboratory, then by the law, that a fetus is not a human being because they still cannot quite bring themselves to say that it's all right to murder children. How about that? I wish they'd be honest. That's a child. I think it's okay to murder children. Some have done that. Peter Singer, professor at one of those Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale. Professor at Yale says if your kid's born, after a couple of weeks, you find out it's not for you, you can eliminate the kid. right? I wish everybody would be as honest as Peter Singer is in his atheism. At least he's being honest. The good news is most people can't be honest to their atheistic beliefs because they believe one thing and they live another one. Even Peter Singer that says if you have a kid after a couple weeks, if it's not working out, just kill the kid. Even he probably says that out loud, but he doesn't really probably believe. He probably wouldn't do that anyway, right? So it's one thing to sit there and have these atheistic beliefs and all that. It's another thing to live. The good thing for us when we want to witness to atheists is that we know that. We know they don't live their beliefs, and we can use that to try to push them to the edge of their beliefs and say, well, if you really believe that, then why don't you just kill the baby outside the womb? Or why, you need to lead them to the natural conclusions of their philosophy, right? I'm sorry, I'm going off the subject. If they believe that there's no authority over us, our godless friends are determined to prove that a fetus is not a human being because they still cannot quite bring themselves to say that it's all right to murder children. Very few of them can. The day may not be far off when they will decide that it is. I think we're coming to that. And on that day, the debate will be over because then people will be honest enough to say, we don't care. We know this fetus is a child. We don't want a child. And since we are in control of things, we can take that child's life. But I'm telling you here, they're violating the commandment of God. I have a second quote by Alistair Begg. He says, if they believe there's no authority over us, that there's no personal creator God who reigns, that there's no reason for our existence, and that we prolong our lives by chance and we die in oblivion, then there's no reason in the world why they should value the life of an unborn child. It's true. If you don't believe in God, there's no reason why you should value children, right? If you're an atheist, you can argue that all you want to. Well, I believe in children and I don't believe in God. That's fine, but you're not living out the natural, what's the word I'm looking for? The natural outcomes of your philosophy. You're being a hypocrite, basically. If you really believed according to your beliefs, you wouldn't say that. Last thing that was the nice bell, right, Brother Keith? I can barely see him. He's like way laid back away. Sometimes I don't see him at all. I think he's got a pallet back there. And he's got a little alarm that goes off. Oh, no, that would be when I used to go up there. I'm sorry, no. Last thing, euthanasia. I don't know what their problem is, young people over in China or whatever. Youth in Asia, no one got that? Oh. Okay. But in many countries, assisted suicide laws are gaining popularity. My wife lived in the Netherlands. The Netherlands was the first country to allow assisted suicide. They even have buses that come to your house and pick up the body. Right? They're the first country to allow assisted suicide. Over time, it was just a thing, let's help our old people. How do you think it ended up over time? I'll tell you. Over time, they've seen the voluntary become involuntary. Over time, it used to be when it first started out, requests for suicide were made by some sweet old man who just lost his wife and he doesn't really want to live anymore or whatever. But over time, requests for assisted suicides in the Netherlands are coming from family members. Who do you think that is? The kids. It's the kids. It's the relatives, right? Not patients themselves. Their families are trying to get rid of them. There are unintended consequences to everything, and there are unintended consequences to violating the sixth commandment, right? There's an important distinction and difference between termination of treatment and termination of life. We need to understand the distinction really quickly. To decide that you don't want to take any more drugs or medicine to prolong your life, I don't believe that violates this commandment. That's termination of treatment, right? Because these drugs are stretching out. If these drugs are stretching out your life for a few more months, but you're going to die anyway, this is between you and God, but my personal belief is I believe that's terminating your treatment. I'm not saying that I would say that's a wrong thing, but again, this is between you and God, right? If you're terminating your treatment, okay, that may be one thing we can agree to disagree. But if you're terminating a life, that's a direct violation of the commandment. Your life will be over. You're just deciding to let it come sooner if you terminate treatment. You may not even agree with that. That's fine. As long as you agree, you have to. I hope you agree at least that terminating life is a violation of the sixth commandment, at least that. Let's finish on this quote, and we got to be done. And then we're going to start next week the seventh commandment, by the way. And then we'll have more stuff to give away then. All right. Let me read you this quote by Dennis DeYoung, who said this. He said, every human life is precious. Unborn life is precious. Children with special needs are precious. You know, they're aborting children with special need today. They're aborting those kind of children. What do you think the Chinese did when they had the two-child policy? They aborted all the girls. What was that, 30 years ago? They're looking around, all the boys looking around now, where are all the girls? There are none. They're importing them from Korea and other places. They don't have enough women there, right? Aging parents are precious. even when they don't remember because they're suffering dementia. They're still made in the image of God. Nonverbal children or parents, those in a wheelchair, those who are completely dependent upon others or doctors are precious. All of life matters to God. By the way, if you don't believe in God, you don't necessarily think any of those things are precious. Can we just say that? Who really believes in the value and the sanctity of life? Christians do, right? Nonverbal, okay. All of life matters to God. If we have our eyes open, we can see this in even the most surprising places in the Bible, like the Mosaic Law. You see it in the image of God, in the verses we looked at. You see it in the incarnation of Christ, when God entered the world as a helpless babe. Defend, honor, and give thanks for life. When I say life, I'm talking about all 6 of these things that we just talked about here at the very bottom. Let me finish this. Defend, honor, and give thanks for life, yours, your children's, and your parents. The 6th commandment means to protect it. All right, that's all we have for this week. Let's stand and be dismissed with a word of prayer.